It's 10 a.m. here in Lagos, Nigeria. Thank God it's Friday. Welcome to Business Morning. I'm Ini John Mekwa.
And I'm Chimeze Obi Iwago. Happy Friday. Well, a total of 194 bank accounts belonging to firms and bureau de changes will be frozen by the central bank to enable it to conduct investigations into suspicious activities. In 3 different documents posted on the central bank's website, the CBN says the order came from the Federal High Court, Abuja Division. In one of the documents, the CBN said it got an order to freeze 60 bank accounts of Blue Beam Capital Limited. The accounts were domiciled in 13 different banks.
And the Securities and Exchange Commission is urging Nigerians to be cautious of activities of unregistered online investments and trading platforms, which are facilitating direct access to securities of foreign companies listed on exchanges registered in other jurisdictions. A circular by SEC to capital market operators stresses that the platforms allegedly claims to be operating in partnership with capital market operators registered with the Commission. It states that only foreign securities listed on any exchange registered in Nigeria may be issued, sold, or offered for sale or subscription to the Nigerian public.
And the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation plans to resume active oil exploration in Sokoto Basin. The Group Managing Director of NNPC, Mele Kyari, disclosed this while receiving the Governor of Kebbi State, Atiku Bagudu, who paid him a courtesy visit in his office on Thursday. Mr. Kyari restated NNPC's commitment to the partnership with Kebbi State for the production of biofuels, describing the project as viable and in tandem with the global transition to renewable energy. He says the rice production program in the state was a definite boost to the biofuels project. Kebbi State is one of the states that NNPC is in partnership with for the development of renewable energy.
And in the global oil market, prices edged up earlier Asian trade today, supported by a weaker dollar as investors weighed rising supplies and the impacts on fuel demand from the COVID-19 pandemic. Brent crude futures for June climbed 7 cents to $63.27 a barrel, while U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude for May was at $59.77 a barrel, up 17 cents. A weaker dollar makes oil cheaper for holders of other currencies, which usually helps boost crude prices. Both contracts are on track to post a 2% or 3% drop this week after a decision by the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, and its allies, including Russia, a group known as OPEC Plus, to gradually increase supplies by 2 million barrels per day between May and July. However, analysts expect global oil inventories to continue to fall as fuel demand accelerates in the second half of this year as the global economic recovery gathers steam. But concerns are surfacing that renewed lockdowns in parts of the world to curb rising COVID-19 cases and problems with vaccinations could alter the oil demand picture.
In the meantime, green recovery plans have been a hot topic recently, particularly as the world deals with COVID-19 pandemic. The ongoing spring meetings of the IMF and World Bank provided an opportunity to engage on urgent matters, including work on climate change, debt and inequality, working towards what they called a green, resilient and inclusive recovery. We will have this conversation with Professor Chukwumerije Okereke, Director of Center for Climate Change and Development at Alex Ekwueme Federal University, Ndufe Alike, Ebonyi State. Next. Well, according to the World Bank President David Malpass, it is time to move urgently towards opportunities and solutions that achieve sustainable and broad-based economic growth without harming climate, degrading the environment, or leaving hundreds of millions of families in poverty. He named this approach to these interlinked crises GRID, meaning green, resilient, inclusive development. Thank you for joining us on the show, Professor Chukwumerije Okereke. Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
So we have seen the green recovery and green transition being big topics at the ongoing IMF World Bank spring meetings. Could you break these terms down for us? What do they mean? Are they the same?
Well, they are not the same, but they are linked. Green transition refers to the efforts that are being made across the globe to move global economies away from depending so much on fossil fuel or on what we call the extractive model of economic growth, and to channel economic growth towards the path that is greener and more climate resilient. In other words, economic growth paths that involve the use of less carbon and less greenhouse gas emissions. This is what green transition is all about. Green recovery is a particular term that has to do with the advocacy that is being made that following COVID-19 pandemic and the huge amount of monies that countries are spending to reboot their economy, green recovery is pressing the case that such recovery efforts must be done in a way that is consistent with green transition. That is with the effort to tackle global climate change and also tackle issues of structural poverty and inequality. So the two are linked. Green recovery is focusing more on efforts around rebooting economies after COVID, whereas green transition is a much longer term that is referring to the need to ensure that global economies continue to move away generally from fossil fuel to the economic growth paths that are consistent with environmental integrity and efforts to tackle climate change.
Well, Professor, how do we relate this? How do we bring it back home to Africa and particularly Nigeria?
That's a very good question. Now, Africa particularly has been achieving the growth which we are all happy about. Just before the COVID pandemic hit, Africa was home to 6 out of the 10 fastest growing economies globally. However, we know that a lot of African economic growth has been predicated on extraction of crude natural resources and selling these crude natural resources with little or no value added. And this is not a sustainable economic model for long-term sustainable growth. So for Africa, green transition requires them to begin to think more imaginatively and innovatively about how to add value to their natural resources in order to ensure that we are not just digging up our oil on the ground as much as we can, or diamond or bauxite or any other resources, and selling them, but that we are pursuing growth that is much more resilient and more environmentally friendly. So green transition is very crucial for Africa because the oil will not last forever, but also the whole world is, in any case, moving away from oil and other natural fossil fuel sources of growth. So Africa needed to think about green transition because if they don't, they may not have someone to sell their oil in the next 20 or 30 years. And that will result in catastrophic economic consequences for African countries, especially the oil-dependent ones like Nigeria.
Now, how can Nigeria and, of course, other African countries embrace these concepts that we are talking about when the emphasis have been on rebooting economic growth? For instance, here in Nigeria, I mean, we're talking about revenue. The government will say, look, we don't have enough revenue to even do most of the projects we have in the country. So not to talk of channeling it to green or whatever.
Exactly. This is a crucial question because money is limited. There is limited resources, and yet some people are saying, then we have to do green growth, people like us. But our response to your question will be that it is not to say that you have to pursue green growth at the expense of economic recovery. Green recovery actually is asking you to find innovative ways that you can boost your economic growth while at the same time attending to climate change imperative or the imperative to tackle climate change. And the good news is that many African countries, Nigeria inclusive, have many opportunities to do exactly that. For example, by focusing on climate smart agriculture or green energy or mass transportation like BTR and rail lines, we actually have the opportunity to reboot our economy, but do so in a way that also allows us to tackle the problem of climate change. Remember that what COVID has done is to actually exacerbate, to worsen the impact of climate change on our economies. And if we don't tackle these two problems together, we will not be able to succeed. So it is important to look for win-win solutions where we can reboot our economies, but do so in a way that allows us to tackle the problem of climate change. So it's not one or the other. It has to be both. And finding solutions that allow us to speak to those problems or tackle those problems is the cleverest thing that Nigerian government can do now. And that also applies to other African countries.
Well, Prof, you talked about green smart agriculture, and you also mentioned environmentally friendly, sustainable economic growth and finding innovative ways to do this. What areas would you suggest that the government prioritizes in gathering some of these things you have talked about into practical terms?
Fantastic question. Let me single out 3 key areas that I think are perfect. Number one, we are flaring nearly a gas that is contributing about 50 million metric tons of carbon in the atmosphere. Whereas over 70% of our population do not have access to modern cooking. It seems to me very logical and simple and straightforward that we should be stopping the gas flaring and converting the gas that we are wasting and flaring and contributing to massive climate change as a result to a lot of useful means and uses, such as automotive and cooking, but also empowering our industry. This is one critical example of where we can put our effort to reduce our impact on climate change, on global warming, and also boost our economic growth. I spoke about climate smart agriculture. Take, for example, agroecology. We can teach our people how to use agroecological means to raise their crop production and do so in a way that consumes less inorganic fertilizers and leads to more pollution and the deterioration of our water bodies while also boosting economic growth. We can put more effort on generating energy through the wind and the sun, which God has blessed us abundantly with. I'm actually happy that the Nigerian Automotive Design Development and Council, I think yesterday, inaugurated the first ever electric vehicle charging port in Sokoto. And we know also there are a couple of universities in Nigeria that are now running almost completely on solar power. These are examples of where Nigeria needs to be putting a lot of its energy and effort in order to ensure that economic growth is being achieved, but in a way that do not exacerbate our vulnerability to climate change. And by the way, if Nigeria and other African countries were to be very serious in finding the best brains that will help them to make progress in this area, the opportunity will open for Nigeria and other African countries to go to IMF, World Bank, and other international bodies and press cases for debt relief or debt forgiveness or special drawing rights that will allow us to be able to fund this sort of green recovery activities. Because, by the way, we have contributed the least to climate change and we are bearing the greatest impact of it. So there are justice and fairness arguments that we can make. But we need to be able to demonstrate this to these people that we have the transparent system, the political will, the best brains, and the political commitment to deliver on what we're asking for.
All right, Professor, a quick one before we'll let you go. Talking about funding here now, the World Bank and the IMF are exploring ways to link debt relief to climate change spending. What do you make of this, and what would such move mean for Nigeria, particularly as it battles with revenue challenges?
Well, I welcome that with excitement. These are some of the arguments that some of us have been pushing for the past 10 years, that you cannot put our house on fire and expect us to go and find the money with which we wanted to use to buy blankets to be tackling climate change, for example, because the bulk of the climate change that we are suffering from now has come from the emissions that are attributed to developed countries. However, when we have presented this argument before them, World Bank, IMF, etc., their argument has been, show us evidence that you will spend the money in a transparent way. They want a rebalancing of the power between the borrower and the creditor. They want to be, because some of the ways in which we have borrowed money in a consensualized way has made it very difficult for us to restructure in a transparent way. And so the onus now, more or less, is on developing countries like Nigeria to ensure that they are open about this. They are very clear about where they're going to spend this money and organize the best minds to be able to hold this negotiation, but also to follow through in the implementation. We had an example before when the likes of Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala was working in Nigeria. She used her astute negotiating power, her understanding of the way that the system works globally, to negotiate significant debt restructuring and relief, but also prove to them that she will manage the spending of that money in a way that will better the lives of Nigerians. And that's what we need to do now. Assemble the best brains, hold this negotiation, and give those people the opportunity, the wherewithal, the liberty, the support to be able to ensure that the spending is done in a way that will impress our creditors.
Well, green growth is the global talk right now, so we'll continue to talk about that. Thank you very much, Professor, for your time. Thank you for sharing your time with us, and do have a great weekend.
Thank you for having me, Chief.
Well, there are indications that the federal government may be issuing Eurobond soon and plans to pick advisors through an open bid process. Tajuddin Ibrahim is the head of research and strategy at Chapel Hill Denham. He joins us now to look at this and MTN's debt issuance program, as well as outlook for the new quarter. Good morning, Tajuddin, and thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Nigeria is reported to be working on issuing a Eurobond in 2021. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think it is a step in the right direction if you consider the fact that we are very low on revenue generation when we talk about the budget of the government. From a revenue generation standpoint, the government is constrained, and that requires, some sort of funding of the deficit in the budget. If we take a look at the revenue generation and we consider oil revenue, for instance, one can easily argue that we are on a positive trajectory in terms of oil revenue generation and the ability of the government to generate more in oil, more revenue from oil this year, given the upward movement in oil prices so far this year. But when you consider the non-oil tax revenue and the other revenue element of revenue generation by the government, you will realize that the government is constrained and there will be need for them to finance the deficit. And the deficit that we are looking at this year, based on the budget, is about 2 trillion or 2.2 to 2.3 trillion naira is planned to be borrowed. And out of that, we expect Eurobond to be a part. And getting Eurobond in this case is positive, considering the fact that we have a depressed FX reserves. And if we have up to like 3 to 3.5 billion dollars from Eurobond, for instance, that will help to support the accretion to our FX reserves and it will also strengthen the government, from in the sense that they will now be in a better position to fund, to meet FX demand that we currently have in the market. Based on news flows, the government is, or let me say the CBN is yet to meet up to like $6 billion, if not more, of FX demand in the market. So having or going into the market to raise Eurobond, in my view, is positive for the country from the reserve accretion perspective, and also from the standpoint, of the fact that the country will be in a better position to meet FX demand in the market.
But then debt sustainability has been a major issue for Nigeria. What will be the implication of this on Nigeria's debt profile?
So on the debt profile, we will have higher debt, no doubt. But I strongly believe that, what really matters, number one is, the ability for us to consolidate and also be able to, embark on projects that will deliver value, for the country over the medium to long term. So when you borrow for projects that will deliver, value for you, the concern around the fact that you are borrowing becomes less, and the focus then will be around, the impact, the positive impact of those projects to your economy, and how they could influence or strengthen further the growth momentum, that you see in the economy as a whole. And don't forget, we earn FX, as a country, so it is a lot cheaper, to borrow, in dollars, in this case, for the government. So you will be talking about 7 to 8%, compared to when you borrow on the naira leg in the naira market. So what really matters, in my view, is what we do with, the proceeds, and it should be around developmental projects that could uplift the growth of the economy as a whole.
Well, the Debt Management Office on Wednesday released the bond auction calendar. How do you see this playing out?
Well, the bond auction calendar, shows to me, for the second quarter that was released, what it shows to me is that, the government is not aggressive in terms of borrowing locally. And I think this is consistent with, what is likely to happen in the local market, because what the market watches is, the aggressiveness of the DMO to see if they are aggressive in borrowing, and then they'll be asking for higher interest rates. And, giving out higher interest rates by the government will render the government, less effective in terms of, their ability to spend on other projects. They will just be servicing debt. So we saw about 450 billion is the minimum that they are targeting in terms of, borrowing locally in the second quarter, and the maximum number, they have published is 540 billion naira. That is how much they plan to borrow in the second quarter. If we put it on a monthly basis, it is between 150 billion naira to 180 billion naira. And I think this is not an aggressive number. An aggressive number will probably be looking at around 200 billion naira and above, as indicated in the March, March bond auction. In that auction, they were out to borrow 150 billion naira, but eventually they sold 262 billion naira in government bonds, largely because of the issue I discussed earlier, which is around the ability to generate more revenue. You will remember or bear in mind that we are beginning to see state governments announcing pay cuts, for government officials, saying that they do not have much revenue to meet up with, the previous pay that they were giving, their staff. So this speaks to a constrained situation for the government in terms of their ability to generate revenue. So going to the debt market is one option they cannot avoid this year, and they probably would have to borrow both locally and also internationally.
All right, let's look at some moves by some corporates. Yesterday, MTN Nigeria announced the results of its Series 3 and Series 4 commercial paper. What are the key takeaways from this?
Okay, so one key takeaway from that is that MTN was out, to raise 100 billion naira in commercial paper, and eventually they sold 73 billion naira in an environment where there's a bit of a tight, liquidity, and so that sounds like a good number if you consider that number relative to how much they were out to sell. But I think what is probably also important to bear in mind is that MTN was able to sell at a relatively competitive rate. So they had to give a bit above the government, in terms of the corresponding instruments by the government, the treasury bills in this case. And my view is that MTN is on the right path in terms of ensuring that they reduce the cost of borrowing in their books, which I strongly believe is positive for their shareholders. And what we should expect as announced by the MTN is also a possible bond program of about 200 billion in size, as disclosed by MTN yesterday on the Nigeria Stock Exchange. So that suggests to me that investors, particularly portfolio investors in this case, have more options in the market in terms of debt instruments they can invest in.
All right, well, still talking about MTN, like you mentioned yesterday, they announced that they've secured the approval of SEC to launch a bond issuance under a debut 200 billion naira. What do you make of all of this?
Well, I think it is positive because, previously some investors were thinking that there wouldn't be much supply of, corporate bonds in the market just because yields are repricing upwards in the market. But I held the view, and I still hold that view, that what really matters is the quality of the corporate that is coming to the market. So we will still see more of such corporate bond issuances in the market. And I think MTN is coming out, to demonstrate that, they can still raise debt in the market despite the fact that interest rate is on an upward, trend. Bear in mind also, MTN that we're talking about is a very strong corporate that is rated AA by Augusto & Co. It is also rated AA by GCR. So what I would suggest to investors is that they watch out for more of such corporate debt issuances, but the focus should be, largely speaking, on corporate issuers that have strong corporate ratings by rating agencies. So I see a positive movement in this case by MTN, and I like the fact that it is a naira bond that they are looking at, which means that their book is unleveraged somewhat from an FX standpoint, and it is somewhat de-risked further from an FX risk perspective. So I think MTN, in my view, is taking the right decision around approaching the debt market at this moment.
Look at another development in the market. Well, this morning we're reading of the warning, all right, from yesterday, the warning by the Securities and Exchange Commission about the proliferation of unregistered online investment and trading platforms facilitating access to trading in securities listed in foreign markets. What do you analysts make of all of this?
So my view is, the SEC has, taking the right decision because every market has its own rules and regulations. There are some things that you cannot, try or do in advanced markets just because of regulation. So Nigeria should not be a different market. Market operators are guided by the rules and the regulations, put in place by the regulators, and they should abide by those rules and regulations. And I think what the SEC is doing is to call the attention of the Nigerian public and also capital market operators to the fact that there are rules by the SEC that must be followed in terms of selling securities to the Nigerian public. And they just do not want the Nigerian public to get bonds by investing in securities that they do not understand. We're talking about securities in countries that are not Nigeria in this case. So instead of taking that kind of a risk, I personally think investors should look inward at securities that have dual listing. We call these securities fungible securities because they are probably they are listed in one advanced country and they are also listed on our local market. I give you 3 good examples. Airtel Africa is listed. Primary listing is in London Stock Exchange, but secondary listing is in Nigeria. So they can buy into that kind of an instrument. ETI, EcoBank Transnational Incorporated, is also listed on the BRVN, but there's a secondary listing in Nigeria. Another very important or good security for consideration is Seplat. Seplat has a primary listing on the London Stock Exchange, but there is a secondary listing also in Nigeria for investors to take advantage. What I think could happen is for the Securities Exchange Commission, SEC, and also the Nigerian Stock Exchange to consider deepening or increasing the number of such securities, just so that they meet the demand and the aspirations of investors that want to have a feel of foreign securities in this case. That is probably what I would suggest. But I strongly recommend that the Nigerian public should be wary of the risk that is associated with investing in securities that you do not understand, in securities that have excessive FX risks, because you easily can lose not just you usually can lose your capital in that case.
All right, thank you very much, Tajuddin, for sharing your time with us today. We do appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of the weekend.
It's my pleasure.
All right, let's look at the markets now. Eddie is on standby to give us all the details. Well, Eddie, I think the market went green yesterday. Did MTN Nigeria contribute to any of those?
Yes, Jimmy, you're right. The market went green, but I think investors will be reacting to the good news from MTN today. But for yesterday, we had the banking sector to thank for that, as that index was up by about 2% yesterday. The all-share index was up 0.07%. At 38,799.83 points, while the equity cap was at 20.3 trillion naira. Volume value and deals traded yesterday were lower compared to the previous trading session, as we saw 145.33 million units worth 1.57 billion naira traded in 3,525 deals. Now, the banking sector was up 2.19%. So we'll recall that in the previous trading session, that sector was down by about 3%. So investors are just, taking advantage of the lower prices in that counter. Consumer goods was down. Industrial goods was unchanged. Insurance and oil and gas gained. The unlisted securities market was also positive yesterday, as the NSI was up 0.56%, with the market cap at 535.80 billion naira. We saw about 94,000 deals, units worth 1.83 million naira traded in 7 deals. For the fixed income market, the bond market was bearish yesterday. But to talk more about that market is Bankole Odusonya, the head of fixed income at UBA. Good morning, Bankole. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Good morning.
Well, so I'd just like to ask, how are the markets reacting to the news of the Eurobond issuance?
Okay. Apparently, the cost of this debt issue, it's getting to the debt management office. If you look at the last top rates at the last bond auction, the last two in particular, they are into double digits. And I believe they are trying to diversify their source of borrowing in order to manage the cost of borrowing and by implication, cost of debt service to revenue. They are looking to do as much as $6 billion. That's 2.3 trillion in naira. And then if that happens, it means that we'll be seeing less supply from the DMO going into the next quarter or the third quarter of the year. There's another main issue here, which has to do with no coupon and maturities in the month of May and June. If this happens, there will be so much funds chasing this security. So we expect a further notch up in yields. That's the cost of issue of this debt. So I believe that's why the debt management office is looking into other sources of funding, basically.
But how is this likely to impact bonds? I mean, with the Q2 bond calendar that we saw, there are no coupon payment or maturities in May and June. So how is this likely to affect bonds?
We expect yields to continue to inch up, not just because of inflation, but because of illiquidity. Right now, system liquidity is quite high. And if you look at overnight rates, they are also in their double digits, with most banks being funded by the central bank. So liquidity is not so much. We don't have so much money chasing after this double-digit instruments currently. So basically, liquidity is key in determining where yields and interest rates will stop in the next few auctions, both at the NTB of next week and the bond auction that will be seen by the end of this month.
All right, Bankole, thank you for your input on the program. Have a lovely weekend ahead. Bankole Odusonya is the head of fixed income at UBA. Well, Chimi, with yields in the fixed income market at double digits, we're just really hoping for some positive catalyst at the equities market, because if yields are continue to rise in the fixed income market, then it only makes sense to put your money where you're going to see results. So we'll just wait and see what happens.
Absolutely. Well, we keep looking forward to better days and better deals. And as we enter the weekend, we only hope for better returns. All right, we'll take a quick break. When we come back, we do an opening call to London.
Well, we'll go over to London, and Juliana is waiting to give us what's going on. Good morning, Juliana.
Good morning, Annie.
Yeah, a lot of releases today. UK Halifax House Price Index, the release of UK travel plans, the Bank of England quarterly bulletin. How have the markets opened up this morning ahead of these releases?
Well, the FTSE 100 is deep into the red at early trade, and I think this is all down to the big story going into the weekend, which is the UK government's new travel restrictions. These are going to take over the travel ban, which is currently in place. If you're a UK resident, you can't leave the UK until the 17th of May unless you have a valid reason. And now what's been confirmed by the Transport Minister, Grant Shapps, is that this will be replaced by a discussion that was mulled over on Easter holiday weekend, which is this new traffic light system. It's already causing a storm amongst travel bosses. Just before I got into the studio, I am in the studio, Jet2, which is a pretty big British holiday maker a travel site. They said they'll be cancelling holidays up until June the 23rd. Hopefully I'll be speaking about that later. And then, of course, earlier in the week, we spoke about the EasyJet boss, Johan Lundgren, saying basically this new system only makes travel acceptable for people who can afford it.
Well, the Treasury has released 2 text messages sent by Rishi Sunak to David Cameron amid ongoing lobbying row. Any sneak peek into what those text messages are saying?
Well, yes, but it's a pretty big story. Unless you're going to give me half an hour, I don't think I can go through all the detail. But it basically stems from this row about Greensill and its relationship with the former Prime Minister David Cameron, which, just to make sure I make clear, he has been completely exonerated from any wrongdoing. But the Chancellor has released 2 text messages that was sent from himself to David Cameron in April 2020. And it basically confirms that he said he will be pushing senior ministers within the Treasury to try and secure a funding for the now collapsed Greensill. The collapse of Greensill has led to potentially tens of thousands of still jobs going under here in the UK. So it's a massive story. The Labour opposition party are asking for this to be thoroughly investigated, and it has been going on for quite some time now.
Well, we hear no shots for people under 30. What's the latest on Asrasenika vaccine concerns?
Well, the story hasn't actually moved from what happened on Wednesday afternoon, which, of course, was a massive U-turn from the British government, saying that they have confirmed there is a link between blood clotting and the AstraZeneca jab. They are advising that people under 30 should be offered the Pfizer BioNTech or the Moderna vaccination, which Britain have of course secured millions and millions of doses of. YouGov, which is a pretty reputable poll organisation here in the UK, they did a poll last night and they've confirmed that about 75% of the British population are still confident in the AstraZeneca jab. It's a big story, but it is about 1 in every 250,000 people that could get this blood clotting. You're more likely to get a blood clot on a plane, or if you're a woman and you have your usual monthly cycle. So it's a big change in policy, but I think the British government are trying to emphasise the point that it is still safe. And if you are under 30 and you have had your first jab of AstraZeneca, you should take your second dose.
Thank you so much, Juliana, and enjoy your weekend. Well, now we go over to the crypto space. Laddie Williams is waiting.
Hello, Eddie. Well, Bitcoin right now, $1.92 trillion, of about 2.50%. 24-hour volume, $131.63 billion, down about 37.28%. Bitcoin dominance still down 55.04%. Price of Bitcoin at this morning, 8 a.m., 57,963, up about 1.77%. 24-hour volume, $49.449 billion traded this morning. Price of Ethereum, $2,076, up about 3.05%. 24-hour volume, $21.831 billion. Top alt by market cap, we have BNB, up about 4.53%. That's the flagship token for the Binance exchange at $414. ADA, $1.21, up about 1.25. $40, up about 0.03%. XRP still doing well. Incredible run. If you took the risk there, you'd be up about 77% at this time. That's $1 now, up about 9.84%. Top 5 gainers. Talked about the Bitcoin forks. Bitcoin Gold up about 31% this morning. In 7 days, this has gone up about 177% right now. KCS, KuCoin shares, the token for the KuCoin exchange, is up about 26.92%. Engine, incredible run there. $3 now, up 24%. We have Waves, $14. Up about 12.50%. So looking at this Bitcoin Gold, if you're looking at the forks at this moment, they all seem to be doing well. There's also Bitcoin Diamond. So that one, too, might be a good punt at this moment. Top 5 losers, we have one, Harmony, down about 6%. Comp, $450, down 3%. Bitmax token for the Bitmax exchange, down about 2%. Let's talk to Olumide Additional now. Hello, Olumide. Great to have you. Hello, Olumide. All right. Seems we lost Olumide there. Coin to watch there. We're doing OX protocol, ZRX. Price now, $1.86. Market cap, $1.411 billion. The ticker is ZRX. ZRX is looking bullish at this moment. Looking at the one-day chart, we see it's up here at the Bollinger Band at the top part at 3,190 sat against Bitcoin. MACD cross, bullish MACD cross here, still in the bullish region. The histogram is up. Look at the 4-hour chart. 4-hour chart looking good. The MACD cross is also in the bullish territory, 4 hours. So this is actually one to watch. ZRX token looking good this morning. Any and Chimmy, that's
so,
it.
Laddie, if I should take a risk on ZRS, is that going to profit me this weekend as we're going into the weekend?
You could make a profit. You could make a profit because ZRX is one of the laggards. This one has not done well this year. It's done about a meager 200%, when other altcoins have done about 4,000% year to date. So this might be a good punt.
You talked about the Bitcoin Gold.
Yeah, Bitcoin Gold, yeah.
Should I also take a chance on that?
Well, you know, it's up this morning, so if you have the risk,
I think you're very
massive
thirsty
risk
for
appetite.
investment. Yeah, Jimmy is
Yeah.
very thirsty for investment this weekend.
Well, I guess anyone in business should always talk about investment, isn't it?
Of course.
But
Thirsty
this is
for
not.
profit.
And of course, this
This
is
is not
weekend,
a-
so we'll look at where to put in the
Yeah,
money.
but this is not a financial
Not
advice.
financial
We always
advice.
have to emphasize that.
Absolutely. All right, that's a wrap on the program for today and, of course, for the week. Thank you for watching. I'm Chimeze Obi Wago.
And I'm Ini John Mekwa.
And I'm Ladi Williams. Thank you for watching.